because this is so important, I thought I'd go over it again. So, Enki, the alien that came down to Earth about 300,000 years ago, created the first human from a Neanderthal, which is what I'm pointing the camera at now. So he created the first Adam, which was a hybrid of the Neanderthal possibly and the Anunnaki, and then he created a female version. Now them two ended up having kids and so on, and worked in the mines, and they lived for probably about 50 years or less than that even. Now that's the Adam and Eve that we know of that was created with the rib. So the Adam and Eve that we actually know here that lived for a lot longer was because Enki 100,000 years ago, that's 200,000 years after Homo sapiens sapiens were working in mines, gold mines for the Anunnaki and roaming the lands, etc. So that's 200 years after, that's 100,000 years ago. Enki had relationships with two human women and had two children by the two different women. One had a boy and one had a girl, Adam and Eve. Although that's not their real names. Look at my last video and it explains what they were actually called. But so Adam and Eve is just basically man and female. Now, Enki looked after these children because they were his bloodline and he was the prince. He was also cast as a god. And that is why we have a record of their lineage, of who they had children with and so on and so forth, which you can see here. Whereas the first humans, the Adam and Eve that we just spoke about with the rib, they had no one bothered writing anything for them. They, 300,000 years ago, they were just slaves. They were born to be slaves. But because Enki wanted to look after them, because they were now his sort of offspring, that's the reason why we now have this information here with a lineage. And that could also suggest why there's different coloured skins. Now, I'm not going to say which way round because people seem to be angry if I don't say it the way they want them to be. But so you've got Neanderthal and Anunnaki produced humans, which might be one skin colour. And then you had the Anunnaki actually having proper relationships instead of genetically modifying with human women, which produced Adam and Eve, which could have been a different skin colour. So this is how we may get skin colours. To back up my claims that there are two Adam and Eves that we know of. So the first Adam and Eve was the first Homo sapiens sapiens 300,000 years ago, genetically modified by the Anunnaki. So we know that, there's pretty much proof of that. But that doesn't mean that they were the Adam and Eve that we know, because their time span 300,000 years ago, the Great Flood was supposedly only 4,359 years ago. So there's a difference of 295,000 years. Now, if we look at their bloodlines, they didn't live that amount of time, 130 years, 135, and so on. So they wouldn't have been able to be here for the flood if the flood was that amount of time away when they were born. Do you see what I'm saying? That's why there was two lots of Adam. If we agree that the Anunnaki in one form or another created humans, whether or not it was DNA in a test tube or whether it was breeding with them, if we agree that that's possible, the chances of that the Anunnaki's DNA matched and was able to actually produce any humans from the indigenous species on Earth at the time is pretty remarkable, in the fact that you could actually have two species very similar. Now, Zecharia Sitchin in his book 12th Planet suggests that Nibiru, billions of years ago before it had proper life on it, smashed into Earth before we had proper life on it, and it created life because there was life, some small resemblance of life on Nibiru, and then that got transferred to Earth. And so he then says that, obviously down the line, we've all got the same sort of DNA, etc. Now, I struggle with that, and I mean, I am a fan of Sitchin's, but sometimes I have to say something that doesn't quite work out. So what he's saying is, because the Anunnaki has the same DNA structures, and we all came from the same microbes, or the same creatures that came from the splitting of the two planets, the hitting of the two planets, he's saying that therefore Neanderthal and the Anunnaki should be able to breed in some fashion, which is what he's suggesting. But the problem with that is we can't breed with sheep, we can't breed with any other animal other than humans on Earth. So he's saying that the Anunnaki could quite happily breed with Neanderthal or one of those species, but I don't know if you can see where I'm going with this, but the logic doesn't make sense, because it's just one creature on this whole planet. Now, if Neanderthal wasn't here, the Anunnaki wouldn't have been, if none of those 4 species, Homo florensis, Homo erectus, Neanderthal was here at the time, then they wouldn't have been able to do it, because no other species on this planet would have been able to have the same structure that they could have done that with. They couldn't procreate with any other species on this planet. So I'm hoping you understand what I'm trying to say. So he's saying that they could, but I'm saying there's only one species, and they were very lucky that should actually match. So I don't think it's the planet. Obviously, if you don't understand what I'm trying to say, I'm struggling here trying to articulate it, but hopefully you kind of get what I'm saying. Let me know in the comments if you sort of understand. Otherwise, I'll do another video and maybe rephrase it a lot better. Sorry. A question I often ask myself is, how come the Anunnaki are so smart yet they couldn't have robots? And a few people have asked the same question now, so I thought I'd address this. Now, we're never gonna really know the answer to all of this, but we can look at this together. So we know they're advanced enough to have space travel. So if we break this down, so on their planet they may have had different materials to us on Earth. For example, they may have had rocks and stones, just like we've got quartz. They may have had, and we've got magnetic stones that can hold magnetic forces. They may have other materials that can do similar sort of things, but maybe even produce energy. So they could have based their whole civilization on, for example, a magnetic system. Now, if we didn't have electric, and bearing in mind electric's only fairly recently, we would have still been using steam-powered or gas or coal. So if we rule out electric, would we have got to the moon without electric? We probably would. We probably would have found a way to get to the moon using some other methods. It may have took a little bit longer, but we probably would have done it without electricity. So that's one reason why they could have space travel. They could be, the rockets and everything that they're using may not necessarily have electrical components. It may literally be gears and levers, just like in the olden days when planes used to have gears and levers before they started to have electronics. So we can say, okay, maybe they're advanced in some ways. DNA. Now, they're obviously been around a lot longer than us because they created us, so they have probably got to that point now that they can figure out DNA just as we have. Stone structures. Now, they've obviously got stone structures on their planet just from the ancient texts, so they've been building stone structures for a long time, way longer than we have, and now we just sort of use concrete and things like that and robots to build structures. But if they manually did it themselves, then they would have that down to fine precision. Levitation. Now, they have got levitation, I totally believe, using sound acoustics. So again, if they didn't have electricity and they were forced to use other means of devising technical equipment, then levitation using sound wouldn't be a bad thing to do. That way they wouldn't need these big digging machines and things like that we have now. And they obviously know about the ley lines. I'm guessing they probably got ley lines on their planet because they knew exactly where to build the ancient monuments directly on ley lines to enhance the power from the Earth. I'll carry this on the next video. in my last video, I was just showing how the Anunnaki could be advanced, but yet slightly behind us in some ways. So I'm just going to move on to the not advanced now. So we know they use swords. There's many depictions of them. They talk about them, etc. So why not a ray gun? Again, that would require some sort of small energy device that they may not have. They may not have grasped lasers or even sort of the electric that we understand as electric that we're using now. They may be using a different form of electric, which is based from the earth, which I mentioned earlier. So swords would be plausible for a race that don't have the technology to build lasers. And yes, you could say, well, why didn't they build guns? But maybe they're not as war race like as we are. We are a very war race. So that to me, that, you know, that's logical. So they come from the stars, but just because they come from space doesn't mean they have to have ray guns. Now they used boats, and this is to move some of the stones around, and they did actually do that. I know later on, obviously in Egypt, we 100% know they did that, but at the time they were supposedly using boats to move things around. And no, not to the underworld, as the story goes. But yeah, they did use boats. And why didn't they use their flying machines that they've got? Personally, I think they probably had a limited number of these craft instead of an unlimited number. And I don't think the craft were, because of they used rocket fuel of some description, because we know this from the ancient texts and about the fire and the light that comes from the back of their flying device. So, you know, are they just going to keep using all their fuel? We don't know where their fuel comes from. It may have come from their own home planets. They may have been bringing their fuel here just to power their ships, to take the gold back to their... So I can understand boats. It's a logical thing. We still use boats, even though we've got, you know, aeroplanes and things. Their language is another one that's actually not very advanced. So when you break down, say for example, the Book of Enoch, they would write things like, and in those days, you know, it's a lot of wasted language. I mean, we're now getting to the point where we type M8 for mate. So they have a lot of sort of wasted language, I think. So that makes them slightly behind in language compared to we are now, I think. I might be wrong. I'll carry this on the next video. Just following on from the last two videos about the Anunnaki and their advanced tech or lack of. So have a look at this gentleman's nice beard. And most of them are, I think pretty much all of them are depicted with a beard of some sort, possibly except for the Aegis, which were the younger ones. So obviously a beard is a stature for them, I would imagine. Now I've put down here razor blades, so I'm just obviously joking there, but they obviously didn't want to cut their beards, so it's and it wasn't just for the gods. I think the other Anunnakis also had the beards. So then you got to the last category, which was they possibly had but maybe eroded away. So the logic would suggest that they should have had roads, certainly in Sumeria, Mesopotamia, where they first set up base, which was one of the longest running locations for them. But there's not really evidence of roads as such, so they didn't tarmac it. Obviously paths were made, but they didn't put these down as a longevity type of thing. Even though they were here for hundreds of thousands of years, you would have thought they would have done something different, but they didn't. And there's no records of that to show, you know, their sort of road structure. Obviously Romans came along and started building roads, but the Anunnaki, who was here a lot longer than the Romans, didn't. Now you've got to ask then, why didn't they do long-term structures? And that someone else actually asked the same question. They said, well, why are they not here now? Same reason that they came here. They wanted one thing, and they got that one thing, and then they bugged off. So they weren't here to set up home. They weren't here to take over the planet. They were here to get the gold to help their own planet. So once they've done that, that's it. So there was no need for them, even though they was here for hundreds of thousands of years, there was no need for them to build permanent structures. You could argue, well, the pyramids are permanent, but that was to help them. It wasn't permanent structures like we build now, like we build all sorts of rubbish structures that we don't actually use, and I mean O2 and things that we, you know, we don't build. They didn't build needless stuff. And the other thing is cables or wires. I'm sure they had the ability to have them, because there was some descriptions in Egypt, for example, of some sort of cable looking things, but these would have, over hundreds of thousands of years, they would have totally eroded away, so we would never know really if they had some sort of wire capability of whatever it is that they would be using that wire for. So I hope you've enjoyed these few videos on power and tech.